39.
39 and holding and holding and holding.
39 and holding.
Cream.
Oh, yeah. Right? Spending my birthday with all of you folks.
Jason.
5 at 7, by the way. Where'd you go to lunch? Da Vinci's. Outside. It's beautiful on the deck out back.
Hey, Karen.
Oh, all right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Auburn School Committee. Would you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, everyone, let's start with ward introductions, please.
Pam Hart, Ward 2.
Karen Matthew, Ward 3.
Brian Belknap, Ward 4.
Ian Poisson, Ward 5.
Faith Fontaine at large.
Dave Simpson at large. Brian Carrier, Mayor's Rep.
Thank you, everyone. First item on the agenda, communications. I want to begin by opening the dialogue around communications, really to let everyone know that I know my inbox right now is flooded with communications, and even during the Pledge of Allegiance, another one are pretty much primarily focused on the reopening of schools. So I'm going to sort of condense reopening of schools, and the emails I'm getting are from parents, they are from staff, they are from spouses of staff, they are from students, they are from community members who have no children in the schools but would like to let their thoughts be known on how they're feeling about the reentry plan for school. I will say that they are on opposite ends of spectrums, anywhere from please reopen our schools with no safety guidelines, just reopen the schools, all the way through please do not reopen our schools and leave us in remote. And you can just I think you can imagine then the varying different emails that are in between. So I want people to know that we are receiving your emails. I'm reading them. I am responding and saying thank you for sharing your thoughts and concerns with us. All of this information is being taken into consideration as we approach in August a final decision. So I know many of us have been on a lot of those emails. So that's pretty much the communication that I've received. Anyone else want to share communication this evening? Same.
Same.
Yep, we're all there. We've been receiving articles on how to reopen schools safely. We have been receiving articles on how not to reopen schools. So when I say it's on all ends of the spectrum, we really are honoring that it's on all ends of the spectrum. So thank you. Keep communicating with us. It's important. All right, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is the approval of tonight's agenda, along with the approval of the minutes from the July 8th, 2020 meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Carrier. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Belknap. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. All right, public participation this evening. We are opening up public participation this evening. For this portion of public participation, this is the part of the public participation that does not include any items that are on the agenda this evening. So I'm not sure, Mrs. Mogul, if we have anyone out there who would like to join us in public participation this evening, and she is shaking her head no, so I'm going to close public participation. Thank you. One of the other things I'm going to do and make everyone aware of is that I am going to exercise my chair prerogative to take from new business the motion to approve the first reading of the health and safety plan for the return to school. I'm going to move that motion to right after the presentation this evening so that for those members of the public who are here can hear the presentation. We'll move into the motion, then we'll take public comment so that people, if they do not want to stay and remain for the rest of the meeting, do not have to. So let's have them come in and have them stay or choose to go at that point. It'll be their prerogative. Okay? All right, thank you, everyone. So with that being said, the presentation of the Health and Safety Committee, the Return to School Draft Plan for the 2021 school year.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight we have the presentation of the plan that's being recommended by the Reentry Committee for the reopening of our school buildings. And you all, we had a conversation, lengthy conversation and presentation at our last meeting that laid a lot of the foundation on how this plan that's coming to you tonight, the process that has led up over 2 months to get to this point. So I just want to reiterate a couple of things. First of all, I want to say thank you. I want to thank certainly the people who have put countless hours into this plan, into the development, into the research, into working together, whether that be in the committees or in the work groups. The steering committee members have been committed to looking at all angles on this. I'd like to thank certainly my colleagues at central office who have been very supportive in terms of anything that needed to be done to get that information together. I want to thank you because this is not easy for you. This is a very important decision, and your thoughtfulness, listening at our last meeting, asking questions, promoting or prompting us to go further in our exploration and thinking about this has made a plan that is very focused in its beginnings on certainly the important things, and that's the health and safety of our students and our staff. So I want to be sure to include you in on that, and I want to make sure that you have an open access during this, after this presentation and tonight, and then in the next 2 weeks to ask your questions, and we want to be sure to give you all the information you need to make a decision. So that said, we have developed a plan that is based on ensuring that health and safety of students and staff, as I said, is the #1 priority. There's been outstanding thinking based on information even right up to the end of last week when we were printing this off as things were coming in around the guidelines and from DOE. There's been a need to be flexible and be nimble. You know, we talked about that word last time, and certainly that needed to be demonstrated and will continue to be needed to be demonstrated. We need to be flexible in this plan as things change with the virus, things change with the guidelines, things change from recommendations from the CDC. So I wanted to remind you of that. So we'll get going. Again, reminding you of where we were. These were the goals that we set and that have guided the work that the steering committee has done. In-person learning, we want to maximize in-person learning opportunities. That's how students learn best. So we want to look at that to the greatest degree possible. Physical health and safety, as we've talked about, the social, emotional needs of our students and our staff, while we want to minimize those inequities in accessing learning that became so apparent across the country during the closure in the spring. And the impact on families, because there were things we learned in the spring during emergency learning that we want to minimize those impacts that were negative impacts on families. Also consideration, you can see on the right-hand side of that screen, where what's the capacity in buildings, what's the capacity on the bus, the number of staff we have, the health precautions, standard health precautions, social distancing measures, use of face masks, face coverings, sanitation protocols, And then again, equitable access and resources. Those are all things that we have to consider in the plan that we've developed and are recommending, and as we move forward in the coming weeks. So, the structure and the schedule of reopening our schools, many decisions and many opinions. You know that, you've been reading the emails, social media, if you follow that. Lots of opinions out there, lots of decisions to be made. So these are two pieces that guide and that we're going to be, not even guide, that are required of us in considering what reopening schools will look like. So the Department of Education, Maine Department of Education, came out with the guidelines. We talked about that at our last meeting. They brought that down to some required measures, so beyond guidelines now. There are some required measures that schools have to demonstrate in order to open the schools. And those are those bullets on the left. There has to be some way to screen, symptom screening before coming to school, distancing and adequate facilities, the masks and the face coverings we have to answer to, hand hygiene, the PPE, personal protective equipment, and then we have to have in our plan what will happen on the return to school after an illness. So those are requirements, and there is some guidance that goes a little bit deeper on each of those areas. On the right, you see the second component that guides how that decision, how we arrive at the decision of the structure and the schedule of the school in our community. And that is going to be provided by the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services. They're going to categorize our county into one of 3 risk levels. And you can see that there, the red, the yellow, and the green. And it's going to be based on metrics assessing the risk of the possibility of the spread, where we're at with the spread. And so you can see red, if a county is determined to be red, then it's going to mean that in-person instruction is really not an option. If it's yellow, the recommendation will be that you look at the hybrid instructional model. And then if it's green, you can consider the in-person instruction. And those county designations are supposed to be up and posted starting on July 3rd and then updated every 2 weeks. So that's what's going to help us monitor if we continue in one mode of instruction, or if we can increase in-person opportunities for kids, or if we have to go to a closure and full remote again. Okay. I want to be clear, and this is tricky and confusing. You've seen a lot of maps out there about COVID. Red, yellow, and green here, it would be, you could think, green means, oh good, we're back in. We still have to be responsible to the DOE required measures on the left. So a community could say, they could be in green, but if they can't meet the required measures on the left, then they still may have to go to either remote or a hybrid if they can't meet the required measures. The colored system there is really about your risk as a community and what is recommended where you could be, but you still have to meet all the required measures, okay? Okay, well first, we have Deputy Chief Matt Feifield here with us tonight. He's the Safety Director in the City of Auburn, and Matt is going to talk to you tonight about those pieces that we rely on. That, how do I want to say this? We rely on Matt to help us be be objective in all of this. So, what is the situation in the City of Auburn and in the state of Maine? Because we need to make decisions based on science. right? It's a very emotional subject. You know, I'm going to say it again, you're getting all the emails. It's a very emotional subject. So we need to make these decisions based on science in determining what we're going to do. And what do we mean by science? That's been thrown around a lot. So I just want to be really clear what science means. We're talking about medical research about COVID-19 and how that is interacting in different areas and in different age groups. So we've been looking at that. We've been looking at other recommendations and other guidance from different organizations. But Matt is going to talk to us tonight. You're going to see what a great resource he is to us on the committee. We're indebted to the time he spends with us and all of the expertise he's provided us as we're developing the plan. So, Matt.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. As Michelle said, I am Deputy Fire Chief Matthew Feifield with the City of Auburn. I'm also the Safety Director for the City of Auburn. What that means is for the last 7 months, I've been working for the city, developing plans, working with staff, and anything related with COVID-19. That includes developing the plans for summer recreation program or any other program in the city. What I've learned is that there's a lot of information out there, and we can't expect everybody in the public to have a true focus on what the true data is here locally. So I'll start tonight by providing those numbers to you. I often do that for the council in a weekly report, in person and in writing, and I've heard from them that that's helpful. Currently in the state of Maine, 3,321 confirmed cases, 402 probable cases, bring our total cases to 3,723. 118 people have passed away from COVID-19. 377 people have been hospitalized for the duration in the state of Maine. 3,216 people have recovered from COVID-19 in the state of Maine, bringing our active total in the state of Maine 389. Here in Androscoggin County, 459 confirmed cases, 54 probable cases, bringing our total to 513 total cases. Total hospitalizations in our county for the duration have been 38 patients. 473 patients have recovered in our county, bringing our current active total 35 patients at this time. More locally here in Lewiston, Auburn, we have cumulative numbers of 110 people with confirmed cases in Auburn, 314 total cases in Lewiston. The LA metro area more recently, over the last 2 weeks, has 15 total cases. Positivity rates in the state are something that I follow often, which tells us with testing what rate is coming back positive. Out of 150,000 tests completed, we have a positivity rate in the state at 2.99%. The US is at 10% on average. The last 7-day rolling period for our state is 1%. So you can see that we're improving. As you can see in the slide, I'll offer a more direct comparison. We'll go back to June 1st, 2020. The state of Maine had 2,349 total cases. Today we have 3,723, an increase of 1,374 cases. June 1st, 89 deaths. Today, 118 deaths, increase of 29. On June 1st, we had 674 active cases. Today, we stand at 389 active cases, which is a decrease of 285 cases, taking into account the new caseload of 1,374. More locally here in Androscoggin County, 304 total cases on June 1st. Today, we stand at 513, an increase of 209 cases. June 1st, 2 deaths. Today, 5 deaths, increase of 3. On June 1st, we had 123 active cases. Today, we stand at 35 active cases, which is a decrease of 88 cases. One added note of comparison, our hospital capacity is something I follow quite closely, and that's our ability of our local system to manage the load of the current hospitalizations and the COVID-related illnesses. On June 1st, we had 52 people in the state being treated for COVID-19, 17 of them receiving critical care, and 10 of them on ventilators. Today, we stand at 10 total patients in the entire state being treated for COVID-19, 8 of them in critical care and 4 on ventilators. Utilizing guidance from Maine CDC and a multitude of medical professionals throughout the state and the country, and most recently, primarily the Department of Education framework for returning to classroom instruction, we have laid out the groundwork for development of a plan for reopening Auburn schools with added safety measures to minimize the risk of students and staff. In addition to the guidance I mentioned, we have also utilized real-life experiences that we've had in the City of Auburn with the reopening of many of our programs in our municipal government. Of great value is also the lessons learned from the reopening of our summer recreation programming. This real-life information has allowed us to identify the challenges that you may see in the school system, and also takes into account the different age groups and how those may be affected. With a focus on minimizing the risks associated with COVID-19, the school reopening plan, and more importantly, the health and safety team highlights several areas that are important to the successful reopening. I'll go into those now. The first key is communication and education to the public. It's communicating and providing educational material in many different forms to allow families to prepare and have consistent information across the City of Auburn. Training is very important. Training of staff, students on the new procedures to minimize the risk. Training on self-screening processes. Training on social distancing, taking into account what's age-appropriate applications. Training on proper hygiene, use of face coverings, when and how to use those, the types of masks, cloth masks, procedural masks, and face shields, cleaning and disinfecting protocols, training of district medical staff in response to symptomatic staff or students, and training of our custodial staff. What's also important is development of cleaning and disinfecting procedures, what PPE types we need, projections for usages, securing robust supply chains to meet the school year demand prior to reopening, and limiting reliance on any one source for those PPE needs. Spoke of self-screening before. It's an important part of this plan, and we're going to work with and reinforce our partnerships with our families to reduce the risk in our schools, ensure staff are vigilant with their own health, and finally, work on a return to school or work procedure, which is very important to define when somebody is medically cleared to return to work or in-school learning. In conclusion, while developing the overall plan for reopening is very complex with a multitude of challenges that will present itself, I encourage you all not to complicate the situation with health and safety measures. In society, we've been utilizing simple yet effective tools for tools like screening or monitoring our health, social distancing, increasing education about COVID-19 to all of our populations, proper hygiene, mask when social distancing is not possible, increased testing capacity, quick identification of infection, and mitigation strategies when infection is confirmed. In the state of Maine, it has been working, as you can see from the data provided earlier. Thank you.
So you can see Matt has been a great resource for us and has been working closely with school nurses, with principals on the committee, as well as we now have a parent who happens to have expertise in epidemiology, who has joined that committee as well. So they've done a great deal of work, and we'll continue that work as we move forward. All of that Matt is talking about feeds into the recommendation for tonight. Thinking about what the requirements were from the DOE, thinking about the guidance that we're going to receive in the next weeks about where we are in the rating of our county, and we're anticipating that will be yellow. It may be green, but it's looking like it will probably be yellow. All that information comes together and making a decision on what can we do. And so this is the recommendation for the structure and the schedule for schools. The recommendation is that we have in-person learning opportunities for our pre-K to 2 students. That we feel that in looking at the spaces we have and the staff we have, the implementation of the standard precautions and the recommendations from the DOE, that we're able to provide that for our pre-K to 2 students. This is also taking into consideration the feedback we heard from parents about the difficulty and the impact it was to try to provide remote learning opportunities for our youngest learners. Also along with that is the self-contained students who are in self-contained special ed programs around the district. We feel that it's important, again, to minimize the impact that has already taken place for these students, and it was difficult to provide them with learning opportunities remotely. English language learners, those who are particularly at the earliest levels, the level 1 and 2 speakers, required more direct and consistent opportunities for learning in person. And then our alternatives students, our students in the alternative program and in our regional special education program. So that would be a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday schedule. They'd be in person and remote on Wednesday. You can see on the other side, in person for the 3 through 12 students. The recommendation is in-person learning for 2 days. That's Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, 2 cohorts of students, with remote for 3 days. And we will be prioritizing students from the same family attending in person on the same days and remote on the same days. That again is response to what we've heard about the burden for childcare, that there might be a 17-year-old sibling who is providing oversight for the 10-year-old brother or sister. So trying to prioritize that to the degree that we can. And we have a committed administrative group who has said that they're going to work together to make that happen. So Wednesdays, what about Wednesdays? Wednesday is that flex day in between where we would like to be able to provide the opportunity to do a thorough cleaning between the 2 cohorts coming into the building. So Wednesdays will be remote for students and for staff, so that our custodians, our cleaning service staff can provide that sort of level of sanitation, cleaning protocol that will align with the requirements that we are being asked to make. So next, we want to drill down a little bit deeper and have the principals come up and talk to us about at each of those levels. What does it look like for pre-K2? What does it look like for our 3 through 8 span, and then our high school students? So Celeste Bodette, principal at Fairview School, Bob Griffin, our principal at the middle school, and Scott Anier, the principal at the high school, will be speaking to us next.
if you were coming or not. Hello. So I'm here to talk to you about what it would look like at the elementary level. I was fortunate enough to have Matt on my committee, which was great. Truly appreciated his guidance. So what we're looking at, like Michelle just said, grades pre-K through 2 would be in person Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with remote on Wednesday for K through 2. Our pre-K already doesn't have, they only go 4 days, so that wouldn't affect them. Grades 3 through 6 would be a hybrid model, like Michelle said, 2 days in person and 3 days of remote learning. We would really work to be limiting the mixing of our groups, our cohort groups. So our Monday to Tuesday cohort groups, then our Thursday and Friday cohort groups. But in addition, the groups in school, which may look different at each school depending on the size. So a cohort group could be a class, it could be a grade level. So to further highlight that, lunch would be eaten in the classrooms to avoid larger gatherings and then mixing of those cohort groups, or trying to limit those as much as possible. Same thing at recess, limiting the cohort groups while maintaining our numbers for gatherings. Again, we looked at limiting specialists, their contact with cohort groups. So we talked about focusing on one special per trimester. So students would have PE one trimester, art the next, and then music the next. Not to say that during the remote learning they couldn't access some other aspects of this special that they're not seeing face-to-face. We talked a lot about the focus on social emotional learning and really leaning on our guidance counselors and any other community resources that might be available to us. We know that's going to be a really important factor that we have to consider and monitor closely. Then Matt talked a lot about training and providing protocols for our safety. So we would be developing and sharing those protocols. We talked a lot about front-loading that, so everything that we would develop, we would get to parents prior to the start of the school year, parents and teachers. So we would develop videos that would demonstrate procedures and what they would look like in each individual school. We talked about personalizing that so they see faces, familiar faces, my face, the guidance counselor, different teachers. And we would just be modeling and demonstrating what does it look like on the bus? What does it look like entering and exiting the building? Hand washing protocols, how to put your mask on and take your mask off, walking in the hallway. So a whole host of procedures that would be demonstrated through video. And then we did talk about providing, each school would develop a virtual open house. Again, front-loading all this information for parents beforehand. And then continuing, we thought these videos would be a good teacher tool as well to continue to keep working with students and reminding students as we go. So that's what it would look like at the elementary level.
Hi, good evening. I'm Bob Griffin, principal of the middle school, and I'll take just a couple minutes and highlight some of the unique things that I think pertain to the middle school. As you've heard, students would be in one of the two primary cohort groups, either the Monday, Tuesday, or the Thursday, Friday. Teaming at the middle school, the nature of that allows us to much easier create sub-cohorts or sort of work within the cohorts and putting smaller groups of students together as needed. At the middle school, students will have math, science, social studies, English, and their unified arts. We're going to focus on highly engaging face-to-face and remote instruction. One of the things, as I think back to our closure from March until the end of this last school year, I'm proud of the work we did with putting the remote learning together so quickly, but I know we can do better. So the professional development, the work we're doing with teachers this summer, and as we get into closer to the school year, I want that to be outstanding. As we tighten up communication, expectations, and make sure that that is highly engaging and dynamic. As safety allows, students can participate in clubs and other activities with their peers. We do not yet know about middle school athletics, though related in some ways to high school athletics. We do not necessarily follow the MPA We're in different conferences, so that would need to be determined what that potentially looks like. Meals would be served in classrooms, grab-and-go style. We would have new drop-off and pickup routines, as well as new travel patterns inside the building to ensure safety. Opportunities provided for breaks and physical activity for our students. Students will be taught the new safety routines and procedures at the start of the year, and we will practice it. We would probably utilize something similar to the videos and other strategies. And then this was actually in motion before the pandemic, but the timing, I think, is excellent. Due to we're redeploying some existing resources at the middle school, and we've hired a new school social worker, and we'll have a new social emotional learning interventionist to support our students as the school year gets started.
Good evening. This has been quite a journey for all of us, and this is an opportunity for us to move from going from emergency education to as thoughtful as we can do in preparation for the fall. What we've realized is that there is no perfect solution to a very complex problem. So we've tried to balance out all of the competing factors that are at play here, student safety and the complexities of a high school schedule. So we've had many, many, many models. I think we have gone through about 10 of them and tried to go through as many variations and considerations as we can. And again, we're balancing many competing and delicate issues all together. But what we're looking at is a hybrid model of 2 days of instruction with 3 days of remote, and that would be either a Monday or Tuesday in class, or a Thursday and Friday in class with remote. If you're a Monday, Tuesday in class, you would have remote Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And if you were in class Thursday, Friday, you'd have remote Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That keeps us in line with the rest of the grades 3 through 8. That allows for that continuity for families to be able to select Mondays and Tuesdays or Thursdays and Fridays. As Michelle spoke earlier, in terms of the older siblings having a role in being able to help support the family. Our daily schedule, students would take 4 classes at a time instead of 8, and this is a big shift. And why are we thinking that way? This provides for a more manageable workload for students, families, and staff, and it also helps enhance creating consistent contact with our teachers. And this is a big plus for us as we start talking about social emotional learning, to have that routine contact with someone, to be able to check in and find out how they're doing as a person, not just how they're doing in algebra or biology or English. That's an important piece to maintain some of that level of consistency for them. At this time, we're still trying to weigh out with our area schools of how we're going to set up maroon and white by semester or by quarter. There's some pros and cons to both of those approaches, but we, as a cohort of sending schools in our region, need to be on the same page because we share a common calendar, and we're guided by state statute that we need to stay within 5 days of that. So that really means that we really need to be aligned on how we're setting our maroon and whites. And why does that matter? Some days kids go to LRTC on a maroon day, and some they go on a white. So we need to make sure that we're aligned with that. LRTC has been involved heavily in these conversations. We meet at least weekly as an area principals, as well as share many emails and text messages throughout the week on pros and cons and things to consider. We will have another meeting on Monday to try to weigh out more of those pros and cons so that way we can determine, are we doing maroon for a semester or for a quarter? And there's more to come on that as we weigh that out, but that has been a very large consideration for us as we try to balance out the complexities of our schedule. We have developed doing grab-and-go breakfasts and lunches, and this is important because it helps to minimize the number of students that we would have in a building to try to maintain those safety guidelines and what we're looking at. And then what does that look like for our daily schedule? So at this point, we're talking about having 60-minute periods, 4 of them, removing the learning lab out of that schedule, and having a flex block at from 12:30 to 1:30. And why is that important? Because that helps us with any remediation for capturing anything that wasn't up to passing in the spring, but anything from years past help support our AP courses, our dual enrollment courses, our bridge courses, our science labs, so that way there is an opportunity for them to be able to have access to that outside of their class time. All right, and this would help us establish those department learning labs. That's where we would pick up the other piece of not having the learning lab built into the schedule. And this also allows for our band and chorus, because sometimes when you do the 4x4 schedule, you really have to make sure that you have all the right players in an ensemble, whether you're singing or whether you're performing an instrument, to try to make sure that they're together, and that allows for that block of time to bring them together. The other part of that schedule that we've heard loud and clear from our staff, and it allows us to be able to provide, and the minutes work out, is to make sure that they have planning time each and every day so that they are having the ability to balance the in-class instruction and the remote instruction. Just hit down. Hot topic that everyone wants to talk about are athletics. Mr. Sampson and I flipped a coin to make sure that we didn't overpopulate, so I took the role of trying to find some information for you. So right now we're currently in phase 2. Phase 2 started July 20th and goes to August 3rd. That changed from 1 hour to a 2-hour workout, with 1 hour being a sports-specific activity. Some of the students can be inside with pods of less than 10. We're still on our pod unit. We continue with our daily screenings. And that's been very positive. Those have been working very successfully. The reports that we're getting back from the coaches, kids are getting into their routine of what they are doing. The one little caveat, we can be inside, but right now we're in our resurfacing our gym floor, so we can be, but we're not. The MPA has not released phase 3 and 4 recommendations. That's expected this week. Online sports registration will start when we have a more detailed plan for the fall. So there's a lot of conversation going out there of what sports will be happening in the fall, so we didn't want to start the registration process without kids knowing what activities would be going on in the fall. A lot of consideration given to physicals, pre-physical evaluation. There'll be a waiver will be available for those students that can't access their doctor at this time. We have a pretty rigorous and thorough and effective and fair and balanced approach to making sure that we have physicals, or we have, I can't remember the other term, but clearance every 2 years or every year, that those are in place. Fall sports, they are delayed until September 8th to ensure that safety measures are in place and that there are no outbreaks in schools to start the year. Thought it was prudent, the MPA thought it was prudent that we make sure that we get school started before we get the athletics started. Currently, they're looking at a reduced game schedule and a more regionalized play to minimize travel. What does that mean? More to come. Is that a mileage definition? Is that a county definition? What does that look like? Other guidance that has come out from the MPAs, each one of those sports would, in their committees, would establish what would playoffs look like and what would some of that regionalized play and who qualifies for playoffs look like. September 17th would be the start of the fall sports season. And then we were already in preparation, but I thought it was important to note that eligibility and student status will be adjusted according to student plans. Student status, what does that mean? So if we're going on a 4x4, students would only be enrolled in 4 classes at a time during the semester, and there is some language around what qualifies as a full-time student. So the MPA is allowed for schools to kind of go back and reshape what that definition looks like in terms of that definition. And eligibility, we know what that means, and so we would very much take the model of what we would do with an incoming freshman. They'd have clearance for the first 2 weeks, and we do eligibility checks every 2 weeks. And so we would take that approach that, with grades 10 through 12.
So you can see there's been a lot of work done, and this is trying to give you a snapshot of what, and the community a snapshot of what this is going to, this plan fleshed out is going to look like. Much more detail to come, much more detail. We're grateful that we have another month, but the training and pieces that go with this. Next, we wanted you to have an opportunity to hear about what this looks like for some of our special populations. So Ryan Fairchild, our special education director, and Melissa Hodgkin, who is our director of our ELL services, are going to come up and talk a little, give you the picture of what that looks like.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. So our special education populations, we think about this. There are students that have more severe disabilities, intellectual disabilities, autism, that made remote learning difficult for those populations. So you have the list here, but I'm going to go in more detail so that parents and community members hear this. So for our developmental delay population, the program at Fairview, the EDD program, that serves students with intellectual disabilities. That program will be coming back the 4 days during the year. Our learning enrichment program that's located at Park Avenue, that will be coming back for the 4 days, along with our autism program at Walton, our behavior intervention program at Sherwood Heights, the 3 classrooms, the functional life skills program, the Achieve program at the middle school, and at the high school, the 3 classrooms there will be coming back, RETC SOS, and the self-contained classrooms at Washburn, and also another self-contained classroom at Fairview will be coming back for the 4 days. So students who receive resource supports in grades K to 2 will follow, or in K to 2 will follow the recommendations for the 4 days, and students that in grades 3 to 12 will follow the blended schedule that's proposed as well. One of the things that I am doing is I'll be meeting with my related services team, my OTs, my PTs, speech, next week, and then my special education team as well, to start designing what services are going to look like for in-school supports and also for the blended models. So kind of looking at IEPs, trying to provide supports that are consistent across the board for that. So we're starting to become more detailed in that work. Obviously, classroom accommodations will continue to be in place. The other thing is, if parents have concerns or questions, they can always call or email, and we're happy to have IEPT meetings to flesh out some details if they have concerns around that. And students that attend out-of-district special purpose private schools will follow the schedules that those schools create. And IEP meetings for the beginning of the year will be held remotely via Zoom. For families that it might be difficult for them to have internet access, we can bring them into the building and maybe have 1 or 2 people in a room, and then the rest scattered throughout the buildings using Zoom. So that's been effective. We can either use Zoom or Google Meets. Parents can call in as that. And then also our in-person evaluations will resume in August. So we have purchased plexiglass dividers that we have a safety protocol so that our students that weren't able to be evaluated in the spring, we can start doing that. And we're already already starting to contact families and set those evaluations up and offered it to them. It's not mandatory. It's something that's offered, and that's going to continue. Parents are going to have choices throughout that in terms of evaluations as we head back. So we're going to have those conversations and have started. The last thing I want to mention is for our students that receive ESY supports and services right now, we're doing it remotely. But for the week of August 11th, 12th, and 13th, and then the 18th to the 20th, for our students that are in the special populations, they'll be able to come back in person for about an hour and a half a day to start practicing social distancing, mask wearing, or face shield wearing, and start working on those, becoming comfortable with that procedure.
Just like special education, ELL also recognizes that some students would benefit better from a 4-day in-school support than as opposed to the hybrid model. The best way that we think that would work is level 1, level 2, and some level 3 speakers as needed. And that's easy for me to quote that, but I'll explain to you what that means. A level 1 speaker, that's entering. They have minimal social language, minimal academic language, with graphic and visual support. That's usually our new Mainers, our newcomers that are new to the country. Level 2, that is emerging. They know and use some social English and general academic language with visual and graphic support. Level 3 speakers are developing. They know and use social language and some specific academic language with visual and graphic support. Can't really say, yes, every level 1 and every level 2 speaker will automatically be on the 4-day plan. Our team will have to go and look at every individual student. You know, what are their reading levels at? How successful were they at remote learning? So those are all factors that we will consider. Just a little background on things that we've been working on. While the parent participation in the survey was very positive, we have reached out further to our ELL families to get more feedback. That's with the help of our cultural broker and our contracted translators. Tonight's proposal, aside from being shared online and through media outlets, has also been sent to our cultural broker and translators, and they are currently in the process, actually today, translating all that to families and seeking feedback. On Monday, Michelle, Connie, and I met online in a Zoom conference with the New Mainers Educational Needs Collaboration. The members of this collaborative included Catholic Charities, numerous individual immigrant resources throughout the state, and Fatuma Hussein of the Immigration Resource Center in Lewiston. I think we all know Fatuma now. The focus of the collaboration is to ensure that the new Mainers and the English language learners' educational needs are being met and are equitable for all the students. And I'm really excited and looking forward to our further work with them. And just looking forward, the ELL staff will meet and look at each student individually and see what their needs are and plan to work, what will their language services look like, both in person and remotely. So that's just an update on ELL.
So you can see, again, the thought and considerations that were put into this. Before we move on to the next piece, just that this model is different than what happened in the spring with us. That was emergency learning. And although our teachers in many cases did a phenomenal job in bridging the gaps, there wasn't time. We were having to respond. We want to make sure that we are building off of some of the things that went well, but building beyond, as Mr. Griffin talked about, to assure that we have high levels of engagement, to assure that we are providing high-quality educational opportunities to all students in an equitable way, in spite of the challenge that COVID is presenting to us. And so maximizing, again, that ability where we're be dealing with 2 cohorts, that brings the class size down. So how do we take something that is a lemon and make it into lemonade? So we will have a smaller class size. That will allow those relationships to be built more quickly with students. That will allow, as Mr. Anier talked about, that social emotional piece to be addressed. That will allow for connecting with and building partnerships with parents in a greater way, and those will be expectations that we'll develop with our teachers around what that looks like, while also fostering and maintaining high levels of engagement and a more focused academic experience, because there will be less students in the classroom. All this is what goes into what you've heard around our programs in our schools. So now we'll hear from Adam Hansen, who has been working with a work group around facilities and operations. Take it away, Adam.
Yes, so some of the areas that our group has looked at are the facilities and how those would play into this plan. The available square footage we have would allow for the hybrid, as has been proposed. based on each building being analyzed by the principals. We will have cleaning protocols in place following the CDC and DOE guidelines, and this will include additional cleaning during the day while students are in the building. Students will sanitize or wash hands upon arrival at the school and throughout the day, according to the hand washing procedures that are put in place. PPE, personal protective equipment, and cleaning supplies are being ordered or have been ordered in some cases, and we're pleased that the Department of Education is providing a large amount of some of the items such as masks, face shields, sanitizer, sanitizing wipes, so that'll be a big help to us. We've ordered plexiglass to have plexiglass in dividers in high traffic areas such as front offices, and also ordering plexiglass dividers to be used in the classroom for some breakout instruction. Signage will be in place throughout buildings to direct traffic flow, as well as to remind everyone and mark out 6 feet for social distancing throughout the building. On the transportation front, per DOE guidelines, students will wear face coverings while on the bus. The hybrid reopening plan will allow us to have fewer students on the bus at any time, and we will be encouraging parents and families to transport their children when possible to reduce the number of students on buses. The bus drivers will wear face shields. Students will sanitize their hands upon entering and exiting the bus, and the buses will be cleaned after both AM and PM runs. And on the nutrition department side of things, as you've heard, meals will be served in classrooms or grab and go. There will not be large gatherings in cafeteria at mealtime. Disposable trays and utensils will be used for one-time use. Meals will be available both for in-person students as well as remote students all 5 school days of a week. And nutrition-specific cleaning protocols that are in place and have been in place will continue to be used as we move forward to ensure safety.
Great. Good. Oops, wrong way. Let's try that. So again, just we have developed these plans based on the goals and the considerations that we talked about at the beginning. Just wanted to bring us back to that, as well as forward from at this point, we're looking at the continued, over the next 2 weeks, continued feedback loops. So there are forums that will be held next week. And I'm sorry, I thought I had made a slide, but I didn't. But maybe I can get that. It will be on our website, and it will be on our social media outlets. The dates for the forums and how parents can register to attend those forums. Those forums will be held in neighborhood schools in the elementary, as well as at the middle school and the high school. And that will be an opportunity for people to hear a little bit about the plan specific to that level, and then provide feedback at that time to us. Along with that, we also have a copy of the plan that's on our website and a survey that's next to that. So once somebody reads the plan, they can go on to the survey and provide feedback through that means if that's something that fits their schedule better. Along with that, we have forums going simultaneously next week with our staff. And so we want to hear from the teacher side of this coin on what the plan looks like, sounds like, what things we like in the plan, what things could be improved in the plan to move forward, as well as questions that people might have. So all of those pieces of feedback are being gathered now so that we have that information and creating a plan that fits the needs of the students in Auburn and maximizes the experience of learning for all. And I just want to say thank you one more time, because the steering committee was amazing. Amazing group of people in both the steering committee and the work groups, but also our community. As I'm reading last night from Facebook, this is on people's minds. We knew that when we saw the survey come out, and we had so many people respond. So I thank you that this is so important to the community and that they've been willing to share with us already about this, but also to, thanking our students, because we know that they are the rock stars out there, and you know, that they'll be ready to come back. I've already heard from them about wanting to come back. And then also our teachers who stepped up last spring and didn't stop just because June rolled around, and have continued to work steadily and with focus about what their classrooms will look like in the start of the school year.
Thank you all. Thank you for that presentation. It was hard to sort of sit still for a minute and hold our questions. So at this point, we're going to open it up to members of the school committee for questions that they have regarding the plan. And I will say, I think it's important to say that as I'm looking around this room and think about who the members of the school committee are, I think it's important to note that with the exception of our mayor's rep, every single one of us has either a child, multiple children, or grandchildren that attend Auburn schools. The decisions made do not just impact a community, and therefore we've made this decision for other people, but the decisions that will be made coming up in August will impact our homes, our families, our children, and our grandchildren as well. I think that's really important to know that, to put that out there, that we're part of this, the impact of this decision as well. So with that being said, I'm going to open up the question point at this point to members of the school committee. Any questions on the presentation?
I have a few.
Go, absolutely, jump right in.
Mr. Feifield, I could address you. Out of the 35 active cases in Androscoggin, how many are in Auburn? And what is the positivity rate of Auburn, if you know?
Unfortunately, they do not define those numbers for us at any level. I have requested those multiple times, but they're not available to us.
So, in theory, there could be 0 positive cases in Auburn today? In theory?
In theory, they could be. I would lean on the number that I provided you the last 2 weeks in the Lewiston-Auburn area, 15 new cases is probably the most accurate number.
And one other question, if I may, please. The summer rec program, how many kids and people are working, engaging in that, and how many positive tests have been taken from that?
There has been, let me just back up a little, there's 180 children being served in that program using multiple sites, including some of your schools. At this point, although we've had a few rare circumstances of concern, there has been no positive cases in that program.
CDC guidelines, wearing a mask. Good.
Yep,
So it's
all the same precautions that we're proposing here.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Matt, while you're here, can you do you know the statistics of how many of these positive cases are school-age children?
No, not locally. They don't define that. It's very difficult to pin down even at a national level the cases, but what I can say is that the mortality rate for under 17 years old accounts for a very small percentage in our country. I'm still working on defining all those numbers, but here in the state of Maine, they're not defined well for us.
Okay, thank you.
I have a slew of questions, so before I sort of start embarking on these questions, or I can just jump in. Anyone else have any other? Go ahead, absolutely.
I don't mind. I kind of want to address them to certain people. So.
Okay.
And I was going to.
Go right ahead.
Scott, I have a question for you. Is for the maximum amount of classes that kids can take, and there can be a combination of EL offered classes and college classes to consider that person a student. So 1 EL class and 3 remote college. That would be, they're a full-time student, great. I'm going to defer to you. I mean, I want to make sure I'm eloquent this evening.
No. I
First for everything.
I think we'll go back and forth. So one of my questions is, can families decide which cohort they want to join? I want to make sure that's really clear. Can they join, I choose the Monday, Tuesday, I choose the Thursday, Friday? Can parents choose, can families choose which cohort they'd like to join? Or will the school assign them a cohort based
So-
on their family?
Right. So right now, we're using that, keeping families together as our criteria to divide or to schedule students into the two cohorts. To add the variable of choice on that would probably not be feasible, and it would become a task that would be quite difficult. That said, we always want to make an attempt if there's a certain situation. I had a family that when they heard, for example, that we were going to try to have all the students come in on the same day, they said, oh, please, no. Please take them on different days. And they had reasons for doing that. So we didn't say yes or no, but we hear those types of situations. We want to accommodate where we can. But to start off, those cohorts will be made based on family members in the same cohort.
Okay. What about, should families, and these might come up at parent forums, but should families choose full remote? They decide they're doing no in-person learning, they want full remote learning for whatever their reasons are. Is it the Auburn School Department's responsibility to take on those, the full remote learning students?
Okay. So at this point, we are looking at that providing a remote option for students, and we believe we'll be able to accommodate that. I saw quite a few parents who were talking about, I'm not comfortable right now, I may be comfortable in a bit, but right now I'm not comfortable. We're working with the State Department of Education as well, who has a platform that they will be putting out to support students and families who choose that option.
Okay. What factors would need to be in place in order for us? Is it, when I'm looking at the factors that are keeping us potentially from not going back completely in person, and I'm reading through the list, am I correct in understanding that it's probably the social distancing that is keeping us from fully returning in person? If we were green and our cases stayed low and we're still in this county, still trending low, is it really the social distancing and the square footage we have within the Auburn School Department?
Yeah, it's really three things. It's the social distancing requirement, it's the facility, square footage, as you said, and then it's staffing, it's supervision. So we might have spaces, but if we don't have adults who can either minimally supervise, but we really want to be maximizing and giving an equitable opportunity for learning.
Right, because where I might be a teacher who has been assigned, I have 25 children on my caseload, I can put 10 in this room and 12 in this room, if I'm understanding correctly, and 12 in this room. How am I supervising the group that's 10 over here and the group that's 12 over here? What factors would cause us to shut down again? If to go right now, if we're thinking of hybrid, what factors would cause us to completely shut down again or move to remote? I shouldn't say shut down. I don't like when people refer to schools as shutting down, because shutting down means we didn't offer anything. So to go from remote to go from hybrid fully to remote again.
So that would be where we would be hearing from Deputy Chief Feifield again. If the numbers were starting to change in terms of the cases of COVID and the impact on the metrics for our county, and we started to move into that red zone, that would be precipitating a move toward a more remote program.
And can the reverse be said, to move from the hybrid back to in-person if we are trending well and noticing maybe we go from 6 feet to 3 feet with distancing? Are those factors that might play into full in-person return?
It would be that's a great question. It would be partially based on that, because remember, we also have to meet the requirements regardless of if we are in green. We still have to meet all the requirements. So your previous question around what are the factors that are limiting us, those three factors of distancing, square footage, and staffing, we still would have to be able to answer to that.
Okay.
go ahead.
To that question, excuse me, please, what true level of authority does any state agency have over the school district?
What true level of authority?
To mandate anything?
Well, and I'm going to, Dr. Brown, if you want to help with that, because I mean, I can answer that in a general way, but what authority do they have? I mean, there's a health and safety piece that they have an authority over, and the governor has authority over in terms of what's happening in our communities. And so now we follow some of those things. So like the recent face coverings
So
requirement.
let me rephrase my question. I appreciate your
Thank you.
response. Yellow, green, and red. That's a recommendation from the governor's office. What authority does she have to say, you're yellow, you cannot, you have to do this?
So my understanding is that they're putting out this guidance and that there's a strong recommendation with it.
It's a recommendation. Okay, perfect. Another question. I appreciate the work you've all done. I really do. What percentage of Auburn students still do not have internet access?
That I can't answer the question tonight for you. We have that information. I didn't come with that information tonight.
So is it fair to say we still have students who do not have internet access?
Well, from what I understand, and if I can answer, what would be better is if I asked Peter that question.
I've been asking that since the spring, so I think it's really important that we know that and we address it before July 30 or whenever the date come back is.
We were able to get hotspots to all our students.
So it's 100%.
We were able to do that. And
That's
so there's,
consistent. That's
of all the
consistent.
students that we knew of, you know, that's the hard part of it, for me to say 100% to you, and then you get an email from somebody that we weren't aware of. I want to put that caveat on it. But
Oh, no, I'm not trying to
everyone-
catch anyone. I think it's important that we educate every kid in Auburn
I don't feel.
figure out how do we identify them if they don't. Another question, I don't know if this is for Dr. Brown or for you. Are you monitoring staff movement on the weekends?
Are we monitoring?
Mr. Renier wants to go down and check out Boston College. Based on recommendations from the governor's office, he needs to quarantine for 14 days or provide a,
Yeah, we're expecting that of our staff.
that's, the staff know that.
Not monitoring that, but yeah, we're expecting that they're following the guidelines that are put out by the governor.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
So if I might add to that, we will send to the staff by the end of the week a policy position that follows what the city sent out to its employees regarding what states have quarantine recommendations or requirements when you come back into Maine, how you need to access testing and provide documentation that you've either had quarantine time or that you've been assessed and you do not have COVID.
Great. I think that's important. I do think it's another safety measure.
Yes.
And did you want to?
No, go ahead.
I think I only have one more question. I appreciate the responses, Michelle, I really do. I think we need to be as informed as possible.
Absolutely.
So I hope you don't feel like I'm cross-examining you. I'm
Okay.
asking.
Good.
Perhaps
Thank you.
my most.
I appreciate that.
The question that I hope I can get a solid response on, because my personal experience with this spring was not positive. And I need to know what mechanisms will be put in place to ensure the instruction remotely is the best possible education our kids can get.
So you want me to answer that?
It's a strong consideration. I appreciate the effort from the springtime. I think it was like, the lemons to lemonades thing. Absolutely. It was new, but now it's not unprecedented. Like, we have some baseline data, I would believe.
Yes.
And I just need to know if my son, who's a senior in high school, if he's going to go to school on Monday and Tuesday and be taught remotely, what level of oversight will there be on the instructors to make sure there's actual instruction?
Absolutely.
And not just do this, actually teaching. And I will say this is my caveat, the efforts of the majority of our teachers, I'm sure, is off the charts. There is no doubt about it. They were asked to do something that has never been done before, and at the end of the day, there's really no complaints. Issues that I had were remedied incredibly quickly, which I appreciate, but I think that's a very, very important enhancement that needs to be had for the remote learning, that there's actual instruction happening.
Yes. So the challenge with this, the model that we're presenting, is that teachers will be teaching in person 4 days.
Right.
So the remote learning is going to be involving what we call synchronous, but more likely asynchronous, so not in real-time teaching, because the teacher will be with students in person. So there will be, we're looking at, there is one of the work groups is the academic program work group, and part of that program, that work group's responsibility is the remote learning plan. And Shelley Mogul and an army of teachers, is that fair to say, are working on just what you're talking about, to assure, to learn from, like I said, those things that did work well, enhance them, take them to the next level, and then the feedback that we've gotten on areas that were not as positive, that we're addressing that. We're looking at the curriculum, how to be laser sharp on that curriculum, and the delivery methods that work better in a remote learning setting.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that
And
response.
we'll update you, of course, on that
Thank
from
you.
that committee.
Okay. I have more questions, but do you have more question?
I have one question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
My question is for Ryan. In the special education part of the program, you had mentioned that the IEPs will be starting to be looked at again in August. Will our special purpose schools, they'll send you the information as to what their schedule is, and then once you receive that information, you will review the IEPs to make sure that they're still capable of providing the level of service that's within the IEP?
So I just want to clarify, so what we're going to be doing in August is starting evaluations that we weren't able to complete. So students that were either in referral for special ed or looking at re-eligibility meetings, we have to evaluate them again. So we're going to start that in August. The work that you're talking about is ongoing. So many of the special purpose private schools have already told us what their plan is for the fall. Not all of them, but many of them have. And they're connecting with families and working with Laura Shaw, our special services coordinator, to communicate what those plans are. And if IEPs are up and coming or needing to be amended or changed, those meetings are happening. So any change that fundamentally changes the IEP, we're having conversations about that, connecting with families and holding those meetings remotely. But just like what our plans are here, they're considering the IEPs and implementing them in accordance with what they plan on doing, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Do you have a question, Faith?
Yeah, I did just get a message from someone in the public that they cannot hear the sound well, so I don't know if somebody can address that.
It's in the back.
Thank you, Shelley.
That's the
So I just had a question about daily screening and what policies we're going to have in place for, are we taking temperatures? Is every student going to have a COVID test? And then with that being said too, how are we going to police students and parents that have gone on vacations or left the state, like Dave brought up for teachers, because I think it's important to facilitate that for students and parents, because that's going to be a whole new ballgame.
So, good question. Screening of students. There'll be a program in place and available to the parents. There'll be an educational component of that, and we'll be asking for the families to cooperate with us and work with us to be in compliance with that. With the staff, it'll be a requirement to do the self-check.
Okay.
As noted earlier, as far as travel, there are requirements, and as a city as a whole, will be consistent across the board, which will require some level of quarantine and testing upon return from vacation or travel outside of anything not designated for an exemption by the governor.
Okay, so, whoa.
Your mics just got turned off. Yep, watch out, yeah.
So if a family does travel and they don't quarantine when they come back, but it's on Facebook that they traveled, how will we address something like that? Because I'm sure we're going to get a lot of complaints about friends of theirs that are on Facebook that see they're out of the country.
Certainly, we'll work on a case-by-case basis, but what I can tell you at the city level, we've had very good compliance. I get phone calls daily about people inquiring about vacations that have thinking about take vacations or that are returning from vacations. So also with the screening, we've had in person with the staff, we've had 100% compliance across the board. It's worked well. Everybody seems to be working with us on that.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had, maybe for Michelle or whoever wants to respond, is are we going to ask parents to give us a deadline when, if, say, there's many families that don't feel it's safe for their kids to go back to school at all, are we requesting that they tell us that at a certain date, because we may be able to bring more kids on board? Because I know we've heard talking, looking at Facebook, there's a lot of families that want their kids to go back to school 5 days a week. There's a lot of parents that say, my kids will absolutely not be going back. Because I would hate to see that if half of the population doesn't send their kids back, then the other half could come. I really don't want any kids to miss any opportunities to be in the classroom. So I just would like to see that we have some plan in place that, please let us know by such and such a date that your kids will or won't be returning.
So what I can tell you is that there is, within the work groups, conversation about contacting each family, probably first through a general survey, and almost, it's not a re-registration, but it's what are your intentions around accessing the program now that the plan, once the plan gets approved, and they can know what they're responding to, and then also what's your need for transportation. So those are two big things we would like to know. And if we do not hear, it'll be the task of the school to reach out to every family. So hopefully we can get a lot of response through an easy, efficient manner, but then the work of contacting family by family to ascertain that information.
Okay, so that is in our plan to do that. In regards to classroom and the 6-foot distancing, I've spoken to a couple teachers where they use round tables in their classroom, and they asked me how is that going to be addressed, because they can only have 5 kids in that room instead of 12 because of the space allowance in the building. Do we have extra desks that we can swap out, or whose responsibility is that going to be?
Michelle's looking at me, so I guess I'll answer that. I can tell you we're in the process of ordering probably hundreds of plexiglass dividers, portable, that stand on their own, to be used for things like breakout work and give teachers a lot of flexibility to get closer and do group work as needed, but maintain the safety by having that in between.
Okay, good, because I don't want, lack of proper desks or whatever to limit the number of kids that can be in a classroom.
Part of what my work group's task has been is what could be the barriers, and let's eliminate those whenever possible. And if it's ordering things that'll make that possible, then that's what we're working on now.
Okay, thank you.
Faith, you took a question that I have, because I just picture myself sitting at my kidney-shaped table, and how am I spacing these kids apart, or how am I going to work with them? So you answered a question that I had already, Adam. But I'm going to piggyback on something that Matt mentioned in regards to securing robust supply chains for PPE needs. Have we secured robust supply chains for PPE needs? And do those include making sure, children who come to school without a mask are supplied a mask, daily masks for teachers, the paper masks versus cloth masks? There's all these debates on, or science backing up both of them.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of those items coming from the DOE, and that does include the cloth masks as well as the disposable and the face shields. So, and we have, as you can imagine, I'm contacted by multiple vendors daily who want to help us. So the good news is there are a lot of people that have cranked up that production. So between the vendors we normally use and other vendors who we've been in contact with, we feel pretty good with a month to go about that. And just as an example, I've been pricing out those dividers, and I easily was able to get 6 quotes of people that were able to help with that. So, as we stand here on July 22nd, we feel pretty good about that.
Okay.
I'm going to add to that, because today, the department I work for committed to making 2 million masks for the DOE. And they make these They're not bad.
Yeah?
So, and we'll get them done.
Okay. Can I put in my style and color design? I have a question around grading and what grading might look like moving into. We know in the fall, in the spring, and obviously we kind of went through some different changes about grading. I wonder what the expectation will be, or are we starting conversations, or have we even started conversations around grading versus we went from pass to incomplete. So will the grading model change at the different schools?
So that is part of the remote learning plan. It's one of the components that's required there. And so I know that the groups that are working are starting that conversation.
Okay.
We haven't, I haven't had an official conversation about that with principals. And I can tell you just anecdotally that on my curriculum leaders listserv, someone posted this question. And I feel like most of the responses, the schools were saying we're planning on hybrid and pre-COVID grading.
Okay.
So that seems to be the trend if there's in-person learning involved. I think if we were looking at full remote, we'd have to have the conversation a little bit differently. And I don't know, Scott, if you want to add anything, but you have to do it in the microphone.
Long and short, that will be something that is looked at more specifically in that academic programs work group.
Yeah, we haven't moved into the official phase of that level of conversation, but it has very, very much been at the forefront of conversations that we've had, feedback that we've gotten from teachers. And so the big hang-up is how do we create a level of accountability on the remote side in order to get a return back to our typical grading procedures. I think the staff are very much desiring that. The kiddos are very much desiring that. Families are. There are a lot of advantages to that. We're just still trying to sort out the level of synchronous and asynchronous work that would happen from a remote side. I think it's very easy to capture when we're having the in-class time. So how are those adjustments that are happening? As Shelley said, the academic programming work groups they're tackling, I sat in with their meeting today, and they're tackling everything from formative to formal and informal assessments all the way through, and what are those implications. And so that is going to bring itself to the scoring and reporting, and so it's very much at the forefront of what they're talking about. Still, we have to tease out what's that level of accountability from the remote side.
Okay.
And I would want to come back to Mr. Simpson's question in terms of the accountability piece and the learning instruction. We have really pushed and determined that we are going to go with the Google Classroom platform for everybody grades 3 through 12. And one of the advantages of that, and we're, as admin, we're at our building, are real toying around with one of the protocols that we're going to put in place for expectations is that we as admin get added into those classrooms. But that's going to mean like a flood of emails. So our email box is already full, so how are we going to balance that? But that allows us to be able to see inside what's going on the remote component of that, much like we spend a lot of time looking in PowerSchool to be able to see what is reported, and we can look at grades and examine that and track that and see where there's some gaps are. Now we're going to have the opportunity to be able to do that from the Google Classroom. But how do we do that with trying to balance the number of teachers and the number of updates in there? So that's another piece I wanted to be able to answer that for you.
I think the one platform is really good.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was one of the most challenging things is remembering 6 passwords for the 6 different programs my kids were in. And Max is, he was in 2nd grade. He's like, what's my freckle pad? I don't know. I'm done.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, because I think that will take a lot of stress out of it.
But I don't want to sit here and tell you we're absolutely going back to that. I think we have some brilliant teachers who are really have that at the forefront, but have that in the mindset of how do we get back to doing what we did before from a scoring and reporting place.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Pam?
Go ahead, Dan.
What would be the protocol if somebody does test positive or get sick in the school?
Thanks, Dad. I was getting ready to ask that.
Come on up.
Thank you.
Another good question. Let mean to sound this is easy, but we would refer to some protocols we have in place to initially gather some information, but we rely heavily on the Maine CDC, who would come in and help us contact trace, make those notifications, implement any testing procedures or widespread testing that may need to happen.
And from the school perspective, then we would be following that, what they're finding out. And that would inform us on what our response would be in terms, I'm assuming you're wondering about closure.
Yeah.
Right. So that we would be determining, depending on what they determined in the contact tracing, what level of closure that would need to be. You heard in the presentations from the principals, those cohorts, you heard that over and over. And so trying to reduce that size of the cohort and who those students are exposed to and the staff is exposed to the least common denominator, if I can use that term, so that if there is a need to close, can we reduce the impact to a smaller group of people versus a school or a district? That's what we're trying to do, follow that model.
I think it's probably important to add the Maine CDC qualifies an exposure as somebody who's been in close contact, closer than 6 feet, with somebody with a positive COVID-19 case for 15 minutes or more. So just because someone travels through a school to a certain location and they later test positive does not necessarily mean the entire school gets.
What's the definition of a outbreak? Is it 2?
3 or more.
3?
Could I add one? I want to answer Ms. Fontaine's question from earlier. It doesn't directly relate it, but you asked about the confirmed cases related to the age groups that we're talking about tonight. And in a small study, I did find a piece of information related to confirmed cases and associated hospitalizations. For ages 0 to 4, that accounted for 10.6 cases per 100,000. Age 5 to 17, 5.3 per 100,000. Just to put that in perspective for you, the overall average in all age groups is 113.6 per 100,000.
Thank you.
Research what allowed us to consider our pre-K through grade 2 population returning.
So it was based on that and not the class sizes and the spacing available within the classroom?
And what science was telling us in terms of transmittability and contracting the disease.
So with that being said, where teachers are obviously older than our students, how are we going to, if a teacher comes to us and says they don't feel comfortable, which I believe they should have that right to come forward and say, I don't feel comfortable teaching, how are we addressing that? Not addressing, but what are we doing for that?
So we're working with that teacher to hear the concerns, and certainly at that point, we're looking at a variety of responses and always trying to match the needs of what we have in the school district with what accommodations that can be made for any teacher. And then there is a host of leave options under the Family Medical Leave Act and some of the emergency enactments that came along with that in the spring.
Okay. And then one other question with the teachers. I know in the survey we sent home, teachers were asked if they would be comfortable doing 100% remote. Do we have any classroom teachers that will not be teaching in the classroom at this point, that they will be doing 100% remote learning?
I have to determine the plan first.
Okay.
Once we do that, then we'll have a better sense.
Okay, thank you.
I'd add one thing with that. Just my experience at the city level, I've dealt with this often since we've returned to full reopening. And my experience so far is, yes, there are employees that had real concern about coming back, some that did not want to come back at all. Today, after many one-on-one conversations with these employees and understanding them and employing some action after that conversation, everybody's back to work.
Okay, thank you.
So to piggyback on the data, Pam Albert, who's an epidemiologist, answered your question about in school-age children, these are the state-level data. For people under 20 years old, as of July 21st, 2020, 333 total cases, 0 deaths, 286 recoveries, and 47 active cases.
And is that Maine, specific to
Maine.
Maine?
You said under 20?
Yes, for people under 20.
So under 20, so there's been 0 deaths, 333 cases, and what was the last statistic? Sorry, Pam.
There's 47 active and 286 recoveries.
And do we know how many were hospitalized?
No, I don't have that information.
I'm coming back at you, Michelle.
Okay, I'm ready, Dave.
Is this the new normal till there's a vaccine?
Oh, my gosh.
Michelle doesn't know that.
Because I just realized it makes no difference what the governor's recommended, green, yellow, red, it doesn't matter unless we find space.
And staff.
And staff.
I don't understand the staff issue myself, but the space piece I can understand based on the presentation tonight. So, I mean, I don't mind asking the question that's hypothetical, and I will not, but I mean, is that the general feel across education in Maine, that this will be the new normal until we have a vaccine?
I don't know that I can answer that, but I do know I hear people talking about the vaccine and the importance of the vaccine in terms of making people feel comfortable. Definitely, I hear that frequently.
And if I can piggyback on Dave's, I don't understand the staff piece either. I understand if we can fit half the classroom socially distanced 6 feet, then why can't we fit the whole classroom if we go to 3 feet social distancing? I guess that's where I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm. So 3 feet with masks. Okay. Certainly that could be something if this committee wanted to look at. You could do that. What we're concerned about that with is the, I don't even know where to begin with. There were many concerns that came up in our conversations. I think the one that people resonates mostly is the idea of using masks over periods of times, long periods of times, continually throughout the week. That we are hopeful that we can do this with students and do this successfully with students in a limited way at first in this. But I think there are many standard precautions, that's just one example of it, as we move through into this that become more difficult. Yes, at 3 feet, 6 feet for eating, and different spaces within the schools. But that's the challenge is when you start to look at each of these standard precautions and what the implications of how that looks in the schools with all students in becomes really complex. So trying to make it succinct.
No, and I know it's very difficult. I recognize that, and I thank everybody for their hard work. And just to clarify, so when we're 6 feet, there's no mask in the classroom?
No, there are masks in the classroom when we're 6 feet. Mask breaks when we're we can take mask breaks when we're 6 feet apart.
So the 3 feet, 6 feet, the mask is not a factor. It's the number of kids within a common space. Okay.
So when you reduce that distance, you take away the ability to do any mask breaks, the eating, and when you do that, we're not following the guidance from many medical organizations to balance the safety measures along with the mental health and well-being of the children, so.
This does allow us to address that as well.
Brian?
Yeah, first let me say, I think you guys have done a phenomenal job. There's no question that this was thought out. There's parts of it that I certainly agree with. But I'll be honest, I really don't like the hybrid approach. I really don't. The logistics, I've gotten, many emails, text messages, whatever, that kids are going to feel like they're in a jail cell. I don't want to put my kid on the bus with a mask. And I think there's big concerns around that. I'll be honest, I'm on the fence because I've also heard. Personally, I had an absolute phenomenal experience with remote learning. My girls got phenomenal experience for the entire time. But I've also heard the opposite, where unfortunately it was the opposite. But I just, to think about 2 days on, 3 days off, I appreciate the effort. I think it was a great plan. I'm just not personally a fan of it. I think of just all the logistics that have to go into it and all the, the extra sanitizing, the extra cost on Wednesdays, and one of the things that I can report on now, but one of the things we had a conversation in the technology committee earlier was, now we've got kids in school and out of school, and we have only got, say, one set of devices for the young kids. How do we support that? We've got to buy additional devices so that, the kids that are in school have devices, and the kids that are at home also have devices. Because if not, then you run into the overhead of, the kid has to bring it back, you got to sanitize it, you got to send it home with another kid, and it's just the logistics of that is a nightmare. But you look at, what are the protocols for, like, okay, kids have to wear a mask on the bus, but who's going to police that? And a 7-year-old, 6-year-old, I know they probably will keep a mask on, but it just seems like the teacher's going to spend more time trying to get young kids to keep masks on than they are going to be able to efficiently teach them. So again, I think it's great. I think, especially with the special populations, I think you guys done a great job with that plan. I like the high school plan because, I think the high schools they're a little more adaptable. I think they can handle it. But when I think of like the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, it just scares me to know that, they're not going to get that in person. And I think that in person is important at that age. So that's just my comments.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for
I'm
that.
going to try to wrap up. Not that I'm trying to squelch school committee questions, but I do want to leave time for public participation in public comments in all of this. So go ahead, Brian.
One last question, Michelle. I've heard everybody here talk tonight about, what happens with the children? What happens with the children? What happens with the children? Which is a good argument, but the other side of that argument is, what happens when something happens to one of the teachers? Because I understand the logistics. We do have substitutes. Will the substitutes be brought on board with this part of the preparation for the school, and will they be kept up to date with all the stuff? Because, all of a sudden the teacher's out and now you have 22 kids, and oh, by the way, Michelle, you got your 22 today. Can you take another 11 and we'll just split it up amongst the class? Is not really something that we can do. So are the substitute teachers that we are going to have online be part of all this process from day one?
Great question. Really, that's one of the pieces that I think those of us who are working behind the scenes on this say, oh, we need our healthy teachers. We need really healthy teachers, and life happens. So yes, to answer your question, plans are in place. We always contact our substitutes at this time of year to say, what are your plans about coming back? So we are in the process of doing that, and we'll also be, the training that we do with substitute teachers will take place and consider these things. But if anyone wants to sub, I never miss an opportunity to promote that. And bus drivers, where are you, Adam? But definitely, we can use substitute teachers, particularly in this time, for the reason that you're mentioning, Brian.
So Karen, can I just ask one question?
Yep.
Sorry. One of my biggest concerns is Edward Little and the ventilation system, or lack of ventilation system. Now, we're not going to be spending any money redoing this ventilation system when literally in 2 years we will be destroying this building. So my concern is, I know that, and of course my son is going to be a senior, and going into this high school, I know that when they start school, it's very hot. There are fans oscillating everywhere. I don't know how safe that is. If there is someone with COVID and they're coughing and now we're spreading it all over. I've tried to find articles about fans, and there's really a limited amount. They say open windows. And I have also read articles where older students and teenagers pretty much show that they can spread COVID like an adult. So to say that, oh, that's a kid, he's not going to spread it, teenagers, the studies have shown that they can spread it. So that's a big concern of mine. And one of the suggestions I had too is like starting school a little bit later where it's cooler, so we're not in a swelteringly hot building where we need to use these fans. So that's really one of my biggest concerns as a parent, to put my child in a building where the ventilation system is really inadequate, especially considering the CDC recommendations on HVAC systems and changing the filters and all of that when we can't really do that in EL.
Pam, if I hear you right, so I'm looking on, I'm looking in the plan, I'm looking at the work group facilities and operations, part 1, C12, ensuring ventilation systems. It's talking about our other buildings, but that only EL will need to develop a specialized plan to address that. So is that in the works? I would think it's in the works at this point, okay, to address the air circulation.
And Pam, you're proposing, when you say start school later, you mean a delayed
like in September,
start?
yes, like something like that where you're not in a sweltering building. And also, does this look like a negative pressure? You know, a negative pressure room. What does that look like? That, you know, you can guarantee that this will be safe for our teenage students. And it is one of the biggest schools that we have, obviously, so yeah, that's a big concern.
The plan is being talked about, and absolutely what you're talking about is definitely come up, and stay tuned.
Okay.
That's a stay tuned.
And also, when you talk about, I kind of agree with you, Brian, as far as the hybrid. I greatly appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I've seen all the work that's gone into this, and I also appreciate the fact that you have gotten a bunch of stakeholders involved in the process, and it's not just one cohort of people, it's a lot, so that you're bringing in a lot of people and a lot of knowledge. I've spoken to my own son about this, like, what do you think about this? Because you're gonna be the one doing this. And one of the things he said was, the hybrid, it seems like it's gonna be more confusing and more stressful, because you're going to be in school, then you're going to be out of school, and then it seems like there's going to be more chaos than structure. So that was something that I hadn't thought of until he mentioned that, and then you were talking about that. So when you have a teacher, if the student comes in for 2 days and another cohort comes in for another 2 days, where is the remote learning happening in this as far as the teacher? You have one teacher teaching 4 days, and then they're supposed to be doing remote. I guess I'm not understanding how the remote access is happening when they're in person teaching for 4 days.
Shelley's not.
So what I can tell you, I think she could give you some more concrete examples, is as we talked about earlier, there will certainly be the extension of instruction, I guess I'll call it, that will take place in those other days that will be assigned and monitored through Google Classroom. So that platform, it will be available, for example, your high school student, right? So that will be used, and learning continues during the times that they're out in those classes through those platforms and the assignments that they have. There's also opportunity, probably more for asynchronous, so things that are taking place, that learning taking place in terms of instruction that is not happening in real time.
Okay.
So that they can access those opportunities. And again, all these expectations are getting fleshed out in that academic programs as we speak almost. I know there was a meeting today and they're back at it tomorrow. So those are pieces. What's not, we don't have enough information right now to be able to say definitively is how many students are going to be back and how many teachers can we have staff who are available. So in other words, let's think of a student who's receiving interventions in some way. Could that interventionist be available to that student while they're on remote learning? So we're exploring, there are some things we're exploring, and I don't mean exploring lightly, I mean exploring with a very heavy hand, if I may, those types of opportunities that may be available, that we have to think outside of our own paradigm in our box, one teacher, one group of students, but how can we look at the staff that we have and make those, maximize those opportunities for students who are in the remote days of their cycle.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I'm looking at the clock, and right now I need to ask for a motion to extend this meeting past 9 o'clock, because we will go past 9.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. All right, at this point, I'm going to close questioning to school committee members. That doesn't mean that you cannot email a question to either Michelle or Dr. Brown should a question come up that you have further thoughts about. My understanding right now is that the school department is looking for a motion in order for them to continue to draft a plan and to bring this drafted plan with all of the input they received here tonight to parental forums, to teacher forums, to have community input so that they can then begin to draft a final plan in August. And in order for them to take those steps, they need a go-ahead from us as the school committee. So right now, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve a first reading of the draft of the health and safety return to school plan for the 2021 school year, and to send out the plan for public comment and impact as well. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And Dave Wesson, thank you. Pam,
Second.
thank you. All those in favor at this point? So we are.
So this is just to
Yeah,
get
draft.
feedback. This is a
Draft.
draft just to
Draft
get the
This is
Continue
a
this.
draft.
Yep.
In order for them to take input from what they've just heard tonight, to continue forming the plan to bring it before
Final
the
vote on the
community. Final vote is not until August. This is a draft vote only. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. All right, let's open up for public comment. Sorry, I just absolutely should have done public comment first. My apologies. Hi, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Laurel Libby, and I'm an Auburn resident. And rather than any sort of statement, I actually have a collection of questions, some from myself and some from folks who've reached out to me, wondering some of these things that they hadn't quite heard clarified yet. So it's quite a diverse compilation. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their really hard work. I know there are dozens of moving pieces, and so I appreciate how much work has gone into this document. Moving right into the questions, which one has mentioned who is going to be supervising the distance learning for cohort 1 when cohort 2 is in school, and vice versa. That is a pretty significant concern that I've been hearing. I know personally my 5th grader would want in-person answers, and Google Forums are wonderful, but they're nothing like hands-on teacher instruction. And so that is a pretty big concern for parents. The next question is, what are the plans or accommodations for teachers and teacher aides? That's particularly who I've heard this from, who are going to be expected to be teaching 4 days a week, and yet they have children that are in school, whether in this district or other districts, who are only in school for 2 days. And I think I've heard this particularly from the aides, maybe because of pay disparities and needing to find childcare and that sort of thing. That's what folks had brought up was their budget. The next question is, what are the accommodations for students who cannot wear a mask for medical reasons? Along with that, the accommodations for kids who can't wear them, maybe because they're mainstream, but they have a 504 for autism. Kiddos who can't wear a mask for that reason or similar reasons. What are the accommodations for children with hearing impairments that rely on lip reading? Thank you very much for clarifying. I'm sorry, I lost track of who clarified it, but where we are on the red, yellow, and green scale, that was very helpful. The question I have in regards to that is, what would the transition look like? I understand that we're in yellow, so what would that transition look like when we move from yellow to green? Do we then move to all kids are in school every day? What does that look like? And how does the guidance updated by the Department of Education yesterday on the 21st that said that maintaining the 3-foot distance, as has been discussed, is acceptable between and among students when combined with the other measures outlined on this list. And how do we weigh, or do you weigh, I guess all of us weigh, the benefit to all kids being in school and having that 3-foot distance be applied versus the 6-foot? Because obviously you guys are well aware that having in-school learning is preferable to the distance learning, and that at least my kids and the folks I've heard from, the in-class learning is certainly preferable to the distance. So how do you weigh 3-foot versus 6-foot versus the distance learning? What is the plan for addressing the lack of attendance or engagement? Anecdotally, and of course this is not research, but anecdotally, I've heard from many folks with kids in remote learning who Zoom sessions dwindled to 1 or 2 kids in Auburn and in other districts by the end of a month of learning. And of course that varied very much by class and teacher and kids participating, but how is that going to be accounted for in the fall? And one teacher in particular said that when I asked her about attendance, she said that a 50% attendance rate to a Zoom was phenomenal, and that the same rate of, say, homework turning in and participation was also really amazing for her class. That was in a 2nd grade class, so that's a little bit different, but 3rd grade is only a year older than that. So I think that is most of them. The final question I have, and then just a little statement in answer to another question. So the document says, plans to take into consideration the uneven and inequitable conditions in which students will be accessing their educational experience. And I appreciate that you guys have addressed the internet issue, because obviously that's an issue for some students. But what I'd love to hear more about is the social piece, because obviously depending on parents working or how engaged they are in their students' education, that can look very different. So how will that be handled when folks may not know exactly what a student is facing for a social challenge at home, and how is the school district going to address that without having too much penalty to those students, but still helping them maximize their learning? And the final thing I wanted to say, and maybe this is out of date and there's different answer to this question, but I'm sorry, I can't see your nameplate, but the gentleman over here in the middle had asked a question that I think related to penalties applied for application or non-application of the Department of Education guidelines. And I do remember attending the Department of Education meeting with the Education Committee in June, and Representative Shelley Rudnicki asked if a school district decides to open normally, are they going to be punished financially? Will there be punishment or withholding of funding from school districts that don't follow the framework precisely? And the answer from Commissioner Macon was, no, not in any way financially or otherwise punish, nor do we have a vehicle by which we could if we were so inclined, which we're not. Of course, that was prior to the updates from Governor Mills and Dr. Shaw last week, so perhaps that has changed, but I thought I'd mention it since you'd asked that question. And that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Mogul, do we have anyone else who would like to participate in public speaking, public participation, or questions tonight? Nope, she's waving me off, so nope, none this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry. We should have taken 2 motions, public comment, then the vote. So I'm just so used to motions, seconding, and voting right on through. So we've skipped right through. Done, the vote is done. So, moving on, superintendent's report. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm just going to take it for folks who don't want to stick around for the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this Safety and Reentry Committee. I know the work is not easy, the load is not light, and every answer to a question brings 10 more questions. So thank you so much for your work on that tonight. And I'll give you a transition if you want to slide on out, or you're free to stay. Lucky.
Everybody?
No.
I was going to say, can I leave?
That was a good try, Dave. I really
Try. Except for those of you with a nameplate and sitting at this square or rectangular shaped table. I should have known to put that in there. All right. Dr. Brown, moving on.
Into a 2-hour riveting edge of seat report, given
Please.
the temperament of the audience.
Please.
So I have just a couple of things. In your packet is a memo from me regarding the ELHS request for fundraising. At the meeting before this one, Councilor Belknap asked about the balance in that particular account, and so I went through and worked with Mr. Hanson to bring you that information. And so I just would like to touch a brief bit on the memo, and I think this may be a topic for a future discussion. So I have been involved with a number of fundraising activities, and I mentioned them here, Team Coney and United Way, but by design, my role was very limited. I was not the face of that effort. I was not the person in charge of it. And in some cases, the organization felt that my role would be a conflict of interest as a superintendent to be the chief fundraiser for that particular effort. So concerning the Legacy Fund, it's unclear to me who the other members of that committee either are or were. I know that former Superintendent Grondin chaired the committee, and that I know that different levels have been set, and I listed here what those levels are and the corresponding amount of money that would be a naming opportunity. So at this time, there's a balance of $61,692, and of that amount I detailed where it came from. And then toward the end of my memo, I opined on what I think is the right recipe for a successful campaign, because the two campaigns that I referenced before were very successful. So to run them, I think these steps need to take place. They include a feasibility study, and I don't know if that was done here, to ascertain what the community could expect to raise as part of a fundraising project. I think that there needs to be an individual or individuals identified who have deep and lasting connections to the community, and those relationships are what opens the door for the next step, which are finding those donors. The chairs need to have an understanding of who to tap in order for that fundraising goal to be met, and that, quite honestly, isn't me, because I'm brand new to your community. I don't have those relationships, and I think, as I said here, I think it is a propitious time to examine my role as the superintendent and what that means to this fundraising effort. So I would conclude my remarks with that and ask that at a not too distant agenda, either the Finance Committee or the Full School Committee take up that. And actually, we're meeting in August to talk about the roles and expectations for the superintendent, and that might fit quite nicely under that topic, under that frame of reference. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So one of the questions I did have was a feasibility study ever done, and where the number, what is the number that was part of the, part of the decision that was arrived at? Is it, I've heard every figure from 1 million to 5 million, and it sort of expands through there. If there's a range. So those, I guess, are two questions. Was a feasibility study ever done? And what is the target for fundraising? And what is the deadline? I guess that's another question that I would have as well. Being new to this committee, I am not sure the answers to those questions. So I think we need to bring it up as an agenda item so that we can ask and have some of those questions answered. Any other questions that are sort of popping up or coming up?
I'm feeling stares, so I guess I can try. I'll try to answer some of those as well as I can, based on, my memory of what was discussed. I do not believe there was a feasibility study done. I'm pretty sure there was not. And the number that was mentioned often was 3 to 5 million was the goal for fundraising.
Wow. That was what was passed on to the council.
Yes, currently.
Part of this.
Close.
Okay, all right, so I think right now this should be part of, to me, it sounds like a future, definitely, conversation in our finance, as well as really diving deep into this, either through a workshop, or through, an agenda item, but I can see this coming up in the future.
Sooner than later.
Adam, was there a deadline as well?
No, there's.
Ever chosen?
All right, that was question number 3. Was there a deadline?
No, I mean, the only thing I can speak to is that, obviously what was discussed was that the fundraising would go to reduce the tax burden. And
Which we're not trying to skirt our way out of, we just want to know, so what were the,
yeah, and so with that being stated, the only deadline that I can speak to is at a date this coming winter, spring, we're going to sell a bond. So at that point, you need to know how much you're bonding, and you could only use what you have on hand to reduce. So that number would be used as part of that calculation. But then any future fundraising could reduce the payments. So it's only a deadline in the sense that whatever information you have at that date will be used when bonding.
okay, Brian?
I definitely think that we need to workshop this as soon as possible. We've talked about it at council in regards to what needs to be done, and I think there needs to be a realization of what this means to the mill rate. And in the last numbers that I heard, that this school, at the cost that it currently is, will account for an additional $131 per 100,000 or 150,000 on the mill rate by itself. By itself. We're only retiring $9.5 million a year currently at the city level. So we need to be very cognizant of that fact, because anything that we do as a city or as a school board here, any raises that come up as needed. I mean, just everyday items that are needed, our CIP, our budget every year, things that we're doing, all adds to that. And when you're retiring X, you can't have, Z be the number, because you're trying to keep those two numbers in sync. So we really need to be paying attention to that to make sure that we're staying within a certain boundary.
So it sounds to me like we have a workshop scheduled already with the August 19th. It sounds to me like we should add workshop to one of our meetings in September then.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you for that conversation. Next piece of your report.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share with the school committee, I had a fabulous tour of the YMCA, both the building here in town and then the campus out off Center Street. It was great. I spent the whole afternoon there, got to see some of the programs, didn't participate in archery, even though I could have had the opportunity to do that. But what a wonderful resource for this community. Really, really cool spot. Also looked at their field that they hope is ready for play. It's a big field hockey field. I don't know if you've had a chance to go out and take a look at it. Great, great resource. So thanks, Crochet. Great shout out to you for spending an afternoon with me to show me those programs. And then just as I continue to work my way around the city and visit the schools, I did have a chance to get to Washburn and East Auburn. I didn't get to Franklin, but that's on my list. I will be at Walton tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, and hope to have a tour and get a sense. Some of the tours I spent on my bicycle. I rode out to a couple of places. I did climb that hill again. I said I wasn't going to do that, but...
Did you go uphill a second time? You climbed it a second time?
Some people learn to come in out of the rain, but I
you never would.
Not in that group. But anyway, it's a great opportunity for me to learn the streets, learn where Auburn Heights is and where Harris Drive and all these places. So anyway, and that's it for me.
All right. Thank you so much. You'll notice on the agenda there is now some different components added to the agenda. One of them being that we have added school committee chairperson's report as well as public comment under certain places in new business and in old business. So thinking about just more communication, better communication, more frequent communication, felt it was important to sort of add this component on there. So as my first report tonight, we have just, as a school committee, we have just held 2 evenings of retreats on July 13th as well as July 21st. And those agendas are published. They're on the Auburn School Department website, and public participation was included in both of those evenings. In backing up to thinking about in January of 2020, the school committee held a retreat. And that involved an introduction to the school department. We got to hear from all departments. They were represented and their roles were explained. And the school committee really was thinking it might be necessary to hold a follow-up retreat at a later date. But unfortunately, the timing of the pandemic prevented that from really happening or getting off the ground, in addition to needing to focus on the hiring of a new superintendent, scrutinizing a budget line by line. So fast forward to July of 2020, and with welcoming Dr. Brown aboard, a budget that had passed, it made sense to sort of revisit the idea of a retreat. So the purpose of the retreats was really to spend some time establishing and understanding the powers and the duties of the school committee and the powers and the duties of the superintendent. And those understandings were established, and we were also able to establish some school committee goals for the 2021 school year. And while they have not been formalized yet, while they have not been voted upon yet, we did touch upon 5 areas, which I don't think will come as a surprise to anyone who's really listening, or if you've been really following along with the school committee. Areas that were areas of need that we thought would be good to focus on were an increase in our graduation rates, looking at our state mandated testing, PSATs, SATs, MEAs, and really thinking about how we increase our grades in those. We also want to create goals around effective communications with all of our stakeholders, regardless of how you access our communication, but we really want to make sure that we are effectively communicating with stakeholders. We also have goals set around budget and creating, maintaining, and supporting a fiscally responsible budget that can sustain the different pieces that I mentioned above. And then holding up all of this is, supporting teacher effectiveness and professional development. Really how we can reach these other goals through budgeting and PD, teacher effectiveness, all of these different pieces, communication with our community. So those really were the areas that we talked about as goals. And now that the school committee has sort of started to shape their goals, Dr. Brown can now consider how the possibility of those goals will help her as she prepares her entry plan into the Auburn School Department. And I believe you're planning on sharing that entry plan in beginning of August.
Yes.
Somewhere in the beginning of August. Awesome. So some of the things we did not get to at those 2 retreats were, despite the many hours we spent, we were unable to address 2 policies that we really want to take a look at. The policy surrounding the job description of the superintendent. That was last updated September 1st of 1995. And so that is something that we really want to take a look at, as well as the evaluation process of the superintendent, which was last updated October 2nd of 2002. So we're going to begin those conversations in a workshop, which I believe we decided August 19th. We'll have a 6 o'clock workshop to begin starting to think about or look at those policies. So all in all, I think it was some time really well spent. We give up 2 beautiful July evenings to come and really have some great conversations. So I thank you all for participating in those with us. All right, next, moving on the agenda, committee reports. We have, at this point, there are some committee reports that obviously we do not, that aren't going to be reporting out. One of them being the Safety and Health Committee report. So with that said, we have our finance subcommittee.
The Finance Committee met on July 16th here at Auburn Hall. We looked over approved the minutes of the last one, of course, and went through our June financials and our year-end outlook. And as you remember, we had talked about at the last couple of meetings, we have been looking at the year-end fund balance, and we had sort of set the expectations. At one point, we set them rather high. We also had some that were rather low. And as we've come in, it's been to the lower end of the spectrum is what we were going to come back with. And I did remind you that we pre-bought all kinds of stuff this year to try to get ahead of the school year for next year. So Adam will give you those numbers, but we did come back in at the lower end and around 500. And if you add that to what we had planned on having left over this year, we're still going to come in at about 1.6 to 1.8% of our fund balance being 3%. So we are aware of that fact, but we're hoping that we'll be able to make some cost savings at some point and be able to build that back up. As far as going into the CIP project update, we have an entire sheet of stuff that I will let Adam get into as far as the stuff that's actually been finished and done, and a couple of projects that we are still currently working on. One of the recommended items that we brought up to you is we got back the second bids on the work that we asked to be done to the AMS. We had a wider range, many more people put in for those. There still may be some shortfall in what we had for bonding. We're bringing that forward that we take some of the CIP money from our 21 budget and utilize it to finish the project at AMS and get that one out of the way. Adam will have the exact numbers for that. But the other part of our stuff was that we were talking about the CARES money that we had, and at this point we've pretty much divvied it all up, all 802,000 of it. So hope for more money from the federal government. Adam?
Yeah, so just a couple things from me. The fund balance, as Brian said, we came in as of this moment with the books not closed yet. We've got a little over 500,000 unspent in our general fund and adult ed budgets. And we did meet our revenue budget for the year, which was a very good thing. And so at this moment, projecting actually a little higher, around 2% fund balance, barring any unexpected surprises coming in. So as Brian said, our goal by statute, we're limited to have 3% in fund balance, and that's our goal, is to get back to that number. We were at that number a year ago. So the revolving renovation project, as Brian mentioned, this is a project that the state funded for us at the middle school at 68% forgiveness, leaving us to pay the remaining 32% interest-free over 10 years, which we did budget for this year, the first of the 10 installments. And the bids came in a lot better the second time around, but we still have a shortage of funding. So on the 19th, after discussing it at Finance Committee, we'll be bringing you a proposal to hopefully cover the $84,000 gap out of CIP funds, so that we can leverage the essentially $116,000 of free money that we're getting to do the project. The capital improvement projects, with everything going on, we have managed to get quite a bit done. Let me pull up my list here. The generator Park Avenue School has been replaced. It's functional, and the old diesel tank has been removed, and that's our last underground tank, so that's a great thing. Things that we're still working on. Also, we finished the Walton bleachers and press box upgrade. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. It looks great over there. Things we're working on. upgrading the fire pump at the middle school to have better water pressure for our sprinkler system, replacing the stage curtain, adding a turning loop out behind the school, which we've talked about, that will improve the traffic flow back there and will actually be a big help for any parking that we need to help when the high school loses some of their parking later on this winter. We've done a major replacement of classroom furniture at Fairview. That's going to be delivered over the next month and put in place. Partial roof replacement at Fairview is nearly complete. The gas tank that we're putting in at Industry Avenue that we've talked about, that should be in September. We're replacing exterior doors at Park Avenue, Sherwood, and Walton. We are replacing the adding a cafeteria ceiling at Sherwood to help with the volume in that room. We are some new cafeteria tables at East Auburn and looking at redoing a bathroom and kitchen bathroom and adding a shower at Fairview. And as we've talked about, improving some security at our school entrances and doing some rekeying. So it's been very busy. Some of those projects are nearly done, some are just starting up, and I'll continue to keep the Finance Committee up to date on those.
Thank you so much. Anything else to add to Finance? Okay, Policy Subcommittee.
Last week.
Michelle did it.
And we,
Are we gonna meet again, or are we gonna do the, or just a workshop on policies?
I believe we're going to meet next week.
Okay. Yeah.
all right. Mr. Carrier, City Council update.
Council did meet. There was a lot of interest in our reopening plan, but there was also a lot of interest in the school building project, where they were and what was going on with that, any modifications or changes, and then the financing did get brought up again. So we'll continue on with that. There had been discussions, and I think it was mentioned here too, that we had looked at one time at trying to have a position with the city that could have benefited us from a standpoint of raising the money for the school. Unfortunately, with our budget being what it was this year, that position was not realized. So to be worked on in the future. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Curriculum Subcommittee, we have not met again, although we have established regular monthly meeting times. So we haven't had another one since the last update that I gave. Wellness Subcommittee, are you not meeting right now? Okay. Audit?
Nope, nothing right now.
Nope, nothing. Okay. Community Learning Center, I don't think.
Nothing to report since the last meeting.
Okay. The new Edward Little High School Building Committee, we were granted, and sorry for the chuckle, we were granted permitting with some slight conditions, but it doesn't have to go back before the permitting board. So maybe a potential traffic flow, I'm not quite remembering, lights on top of some of the posts, for airport things, but we do have, the news is we do have our permit. So that is the update on the building committee. DEI committee.
We haven't met. We plan on meeting, but we haven't yet.
Okay, thank you. Safety and health, you heard the update here tonight. Technology.
Yeah, so Peter Robinson, Steph Weber, and Dr. Brown and I met earlier. The big issue on the table was really the discussion around if we go to a hybrid approach and how do we support having devices in the school for the students who are in the school, but also devices at home for the kids, especially in the younger ages, where we are going into where we're in a 2-to-1 model. Dr. Brown actually provided us with some info that there's some CARES money that will be available where we can go to a 1-to-1 model, which is critical because just from the logistics of, you know, trying to bring not laptops, but especially with the lower grades with the iPads, bringing them in, trying to sanitize, get them back in kids that are going out on a remote, it just wasn't going to make sense. Peter mentioned that, the network will handle it, which is good. The maintenance is not anymore, they're already managing 1,100 iPads today, or devices today, so it's not going to increase their workload, because they're already doing that with the devices. It goes back to, I think, a question, Dave, you mentioned earlier. We have 228 hotspots between what we bought and what the DOE has, so that'll help with, internet connections. And I think right now, like I said, the plan is to look to buy roughly 1,100 devices to support a pure hybrid approach.
And those are purchased, not leased?
Those are purchased.
Purchased.
And the other thing that we're considering that I think Peter's looking into, and Dr. Brown, you can comment, is potential for whether we're going to do the insurance or not on them. We do it on the laptops when we bought the MLTI, but they're very cheap from an insurance perspective. So I think he's going to look into that piece and just see, whether we shouldn't kind of come up with a recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Transportation.
Nothing.
None.
Okay. Share Center, I have a memo to myself to reach out to Lisa Roderick now that Rose is not on there, and I apologize, I have not reached out yet. I think I saw an email as well, Adam, that you sent my way, so it is my intention to reach out to her. I did see, if you are a social media user, they have their times listed on social media as well as updated on the website. So they are open for appointments. So I will make contact with her. Negotiations.
We met today as a group and discussed our plan. We're meeting with Food Services on Tuesday to give them our counteroffer. Hoping it goes well.
Okay, thank you. Parent advisory. Not much.
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, is the June finance report included it was included as part of your onboarding package, so at this point, can I entertain a motion to accept the finance report for June 2020 as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian
Second.
Carrier. Second, Brian Belknap. Thank you. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. All right, thank you. We've gone through old business, new business we have done. So we are moving into policy. We have two policies that were part of your packet this evening. Policy ACAA, harassment and sexual harassment of students for a first reading, as well as policy ACAA-R, the complaint procedure. Any questions, comments on either one of those? I did, and I hate to say I did, but I do. Hang on a second, let me get to it.
Just to give you a little background, this policy is coming forward pretty quickly. We moved it in line in the subcommittee as the policy has been substantially revised, both the policy and the procedure, in result of the new Title IX regulation that goes into effect on August 14th of this year. So we wanted to get this in place. The revisions focus on address the narrowing of the regulations and the more formal procedures that result from those regulation changes. So you have greater definition in the procedures particularly, and the general discrimination or harassment complaint procedure is spelled out, and then the third part that substantially changes is the new definitions and the new procedures around sexual harassment, Title IX sexual harassment.
Okay, so a question I had in reading through this, and I'm looking at the policy on the harassment and sexual harassment of students. Doesn't matter where or how the harassment happens, meaning school event, not school event, social media postings. How does that play into this policy? Is that under the school's umbrella?
It does if it impacts the student's ability to access their education.
Okay. And that is, I believe, I found maybe time and place underneath. Would that fall under where it says definitions of harassment, where it talks about oral, written, graphic, or electronic?
In the procedure?
No, I'm in the policy.
You asked me your question again, I'm sorry, Karen.
Yeah, no, I understand, it's been a long night. I just want to make sure that it is somewhere in here, and I'm not sure why I'm not putting my finger on it, that we know harassment can happen off of the school premises.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that the policy does it cover, or what is the school's umbrella? Is it covered? So sort of like social media to social media, student to student. And you said it does if it's impacting the student's ability to access their education.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how would you clarify that?
So that's broad, and that is usually what court cases define for us and have defined for us. So I think, Karen, maybe that first paragraph, I'm trying to find where it does say, it does define that more specifically in this policy, and I believe it goes further in the procedure as well. So how would you define that? It's not going to be specifically, you're not going to find a specific, because that can take many shapes and forms. But if a student is having difficulty as a result of harassment or sexual harassment, and they are no longer able to access education, it's impacting their ability to access their education. So they may be uncomfortable coming to school or in a class with somebody else, or is causing anxiety. There's a bunch of ways that can manifest.
But like, how would you know that?
Defined by the student, wouldn't be?
But what if you, if I may not be comfortable telling you that I was sexually abused or you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of,
I see what you're asking now.
A lot of people aren't going to be willing to come out and say anything. So how is that assessed, I guess? Was it because their grades are dropping? Is it, you did mention not wanting to come to school, absences,
So it does have to be reported. And if you see in this procedure, it has to be reported. There's a reporting process. That reporting can come initially from anyone. And we have obligations in our staff that if we have concerns, that we are obligated to report those things. Ultimately, if it goes to a formal complaint, that has to be and can only be filed by a student or their parent.
Okay.
I think that was it. That was my question regarding some of this. Any other questions? Michelle? Okay, seeing none. Motion to approve policy ACAA, harassment and sexual harassment of students, for a first reading and adoption.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Faith. Thank you, Brian. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. Next is the motion to approve policy ACAA-R, harassment and sexual harassment complaint procedure, which we just had a little bit of conversation about as well. Any questions, comments around that? All right, entertain a motion to approve policy ACAA-R, the procedure for harassment, sexual harassment complaints.
So moved.
Thank you, Brian Belknap. No second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Faith. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. All right, and now I am going to, based on the fact that policies D, E, and F were not part of our onboarding package, and they were, these were for second read. So unfortunately, we did not get a chance to take a peek at them. So at this point, I'm not comfortable making motions. So at this point, I would make a motion to postpone the vote on agenda items D, E, and F to include those three policies.
So moved.
Thank you, Pam Hart. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian Belknap. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. So I would say bring those back to us with second reads. Moving on, capital improvement project. You're the last, which, yes, you're it. You're the last thing on our agenda tonight.
Brian, would you like me to
Go
tackle
ahead.
that? Okay.
I thought we were done.
So this is a proposal that we had brought before Finance Committee last week, and asking them to move this onto school committee, which they did for discussion. And since that meeting, we have done some more research and looking into what would be the best option to meet some space needs at East Auburn School. This is both an immediate concern with the COVID return to school and a long-term concern that we've been discussing for several years over there. And doing some more looking at the space and getting some pricing, we now feel our best option is to purchase a portable, which would give 2 additional classroom spaces at East Auburn. And this space would last for up to 20 years. And we've been getting pricing from different sources this week. And we have an option we can purchase for $67,000 and have it in place for the start of school if we act on it this week. So at this time, I would request that you table this item, and we're planning to move ahead with that portable purchase out, as Brian referenced, anticipating an infusion of new federal funds. We expect to hear very soon. And so we would purchase this out of those funds. And so we would not need to tap into CIP.
Okay, entertain a motion to table.
Motion to table indefinitely.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. Thank you for that. All right, our regular meeting our next regular meeting is August 5th, 7 o'clock. No workshop involved with that one. Regular meeting August 19th at 7 o'clock. However, we will have a workshop prior to that at 6 o'clock. And we have added in September, workshop for fundraising. Any other items, any other future agenda items or requests for information at this time?
I would like to have as an agenda item for the next meeting, I won't be here, but it's just how we
Wanted to have that discussion. Was it on the 5th?
I'd like you to be here for that meeting, though.
I don't think it's necessary that I am, because I think through the coach's perspective.
Okay.
If they're not gonna get their full, like this spring we did a third, I think, or 20% for the middle school, a third for the high school.
I can't remember.
The sooner they know, and actually, it would be made if, in the event of, what would the response be? And I know it's not our choice or our decision, but just begin to have that conversation.
Okay, all right. All right, any other requests for future agenda items? Okay, seeing none, can I entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Thank you. Mr. Simpson, all those in favor?
No.
Seeing none opposed, motion passes. Meeting adjourned, 9:40 PM. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.